know it's all pretend. The smiles, the lies, the perfect end. The world's a stage, they run the flow. You clap on cue down in the front row. Burn bright. You're blinded now, can't see the fight.
Welcome back to the pod, guys and gals. I'm your guide. We're going to travel through the shadows where money meets the power today. In today's episode, Bankers and Bombs, episode 40, The Long Shadow of Finance Over Every Major War. The core truth we're chasing is banks. Private houses, central banks, the big families. They don't usually start wars, but they finance them, they profit from them, they enable them to drag on and on and on, and often push back hard when a nation tries to break free from their particular debt system. And so time doesn't matter, the pattern repeats like clockwork. Just like everything else we've been talking about. So first, let's go back to the Napoleonic Wars, 1799 to 1815, and this is the Rothschild era. It's a name that you'll hear more and more and more the deeper that you dig into this stuff. So let's start in the early 1800s. Napoleon's on fire. Europe's on fire. Napoleon versus the coalitions. Britain needs massive gold shipments and subsidies to keep armies in the field. And so this is where the Rothschild family enters. Mayor Amschel in Frankfurt sets it up. His sons fan out to London, Paris, Vienna, Naples. And so Nathan in London becomes the linchpin. He orchestrates bullion transfers, handles subsidies to Wellington's forces, and floats huge loans to Britain's allies. Millions are flowing through their particular networks. And so they profit big from commissions, exchange rate plays, and safe lending to, hopefully, the winning side. And the legend says that Nathan got early word of Waterloo, crashed the market, bought low, and cleaned it up. Now, some of that's mostly myth. No dramatic storm there. No insider coup on that scale. But the reality is just as telling that international banking networks, well, what do? They thrive on war. They finance one side heavily, hedge the chaos, and collect no matter the outcome. Debt gets created, interest flows, interest grows, and this sets the template for decades, for centuries. Okay. Now let's move to the Civil War, America's Bank War. Let's jump to Andrew Jackson. He despises the central banks, saw them as tools of elite control. So he kills the second bank of the United States in the 1830s after a brutal fight, but the real clash comes with the Civil War. Now, some of this is just putting the pieces together. Some of this is myth, conspiratorial, if you want to put it that way. But like I said, when you put the pieces together, a lot of this really makes sense as to why certain things happen in the order that they happen. And we should always ask those questions. Are there any connecting points in these stories, within history, within all of the players of the game, so to speak? And if we can make sense of it. So, Lincoln's Union at this time is bleeding cash. European bankers, especially the Rothschilds in London and Paris, offer war loans at brutal rates, sometimes quoted as high as 25 to 30%. Okay? So, also keep in mind that the empire at the time, like we talked about the other day, during this time period was Europe. Okay? That's where the banks controlled the money. That's the empire that was still flourishing, still very popular among the banks and the bankers. Okay, so this is where Lincoln and America had to pull money from, if they needed money. So Lincoln turns around and he says, "Hell no, I'm not going to take your money. I'm not going to. That's too high of an interest rate." So instead, he pushes the Legal Tender Act through Congress at that time. And the Treasury prints what was called greenbacks. And these were United States notes. It was a fiat money issued, interest-free, backed only by the government's word, no private bank. Okay? Now, what does the word fiat mean? Because we currently have a fiat system in place, and it is that there is nothing that backs the value of the dollar, whereas at one time we were backed by the gold standard. So whatever the price of gold was, that's how much money we had on our reserves, and that's how much money that we could print. Okay, so these greenbacks, they're just like what we have today. They're a fiat system. Nothing backed them other than just like, hey, it's the government. We're the government. We're going to give you some money. Okay. So this was revolutionary for the time. This was the first time a major power funds a huge war without handing the money creation monopoly and endless interest to the private bankers. And so greenbacks, they pay the soldiers, they buy guns, they keep the war machine running, and they worked. Okay? But the enraged European bankers, or banking houses, they weren't happy. No middleman skimming profits, no permanent high-interest national debt locked in. Historical accounts from the era show the big international financiers viewed this as a direct threat to their global system. They wanted America dependent on borrowed money, just like the old European powers. Okay, and so even though we were separate from Europe at this time, that's where the money-making machine was in Europe. Okay. So Congress passes the National Banking Act in 1863 as a compromise, and it creates national banks that must buy U.S. bonds, giving private banks a big piece anyway. But the greenback experiment threatened the whole game at this time. Okay. Then comes in a partner that we didn't really see as a partner at the time. Russia. Okay? In the fall of 1863, Britain and France are leaning hard towards joining the Confederacy and helping the Confederacy because they don't like Lincoln. They don't like the greenbacks that he has introduced. They don't like that Lincoln is not taking Europe's money from these bankers. So the bankers are pissed. Okay? So they're talking about joining the Confederacy. And they wanted to basically help split the U.S. and to be able to grab as much influence in that process as possible. So Tsar Alexander II sends 2 Russian naval squadrons, one to the New York harbor and one to San Francisco, and they stay for months. They're greeted by massive crowds, officially neutral, but the message that it sent was unmistakable. Touch the Union, which was Lincoln, and you're going to be touching Russia. Okay? And they didn't want that. So historians widely agree that this fleet presence was a powerful deterrent. It did a few things. It boosted Union morale among the soldiers. It signaled European powers that intervention would risk war with Russia too. They didn't want that. So, as we know, Britain and France, they both backed off, and the Union got the breathing room to win the Civil War. Lincoln's independent money move didn't last, however. After the war, the bankers regained control. Greenbacks were eventually phased out. Debt system was reassessed or reasserted into this system. And some would even connect the dots to his assassination. And if you look historically at all of the people that are against this idea of a central bank network and dollars being on this fiat type system, a lot of those people were either assassinated or they were shot at. Is it a coincidence? Ask questions, right? That's what we're here for. And so when we connect these dots, some would say, like we said, that this connected to Lincoln's assassination, to challenge the monopoly on money, to face the fierce pushback from Lincoln. So is this coincidence? Like we said, maybe. But is the pattern there? Are the patterns there, and do they exist in history? Absolutely. And those are the patterns that we should recognize and we should look for. Now let's look towards World War I. So in 1913, and we've talked about 1913 before, and we'll talk about 1913 many, many times. It's a very, very pivotal year for the United States. So the Federal Reserve is born in 1913, after the Panic of '07. And so J.P. Morgan, that's another name that you'll hear time and time again, he bails out the system, and then the big bankers like Aldrich, Warburg, which was the brother, Warburg helped in setting up and funding the Federal Reserve, but he also had a brother that was part of the European Bank at that time as well. Okay, another connection. And so we had Aldrich, Warburg, and we had Morgan. And so those three sent reps to meet at Jekyll Island and to design this Federal Reserve that was getting ready to be put in place. Okay. And that in itself is a whole rabbit hole. That's a very interesting rabbit hole. I would look into how the Federal Reserve was born in Jekyll Island. It's really, really neat stuff. It's also pretty scary shit as well. So war breaks out in Europe, and U.S. was neutral at first. J.P. Morgan and Company becomes exclusive purchasing agent for Britain and France and handles billions in supplies, earns fat commissions as well. U.S. banks lend $2.7 billion to the Allies pre-1917. And so the young Fed floats Liberty bonds. They try to keep rates low. They expand on their credit. And when America enters, banks buy massively into the treasuries. Massively. So now the Germany angle that you wanted, okay? Pre-1914, Germany is exploding economically, okay? And for those of us that have tinfoil hats, get them on, okay? This is a tinfoil hat time. But it's also historical time. You can look this stuff up. This is all historical. So Germany is exploding economically. Industrial giant taking over Britain in things like steel and chemicals and electricity. And the exports were booming. Their navy was growing. And the key point is that the Rothschild Bank, or the Reichsbank, which was funded in 1876, is what they call a state-directed, tied closely to the government, not fully private bank. It did not have an international model dominating London or Paris. Okay, so this was what they call a state-directed bank. Okay, and we talked about some of the state-directed banks and some of the countries that we have either invaded or went to like a proxy war with just in the last few years, and most of those, if not all of them, have or had a state-directed bank. Okay, not a central bank. There's a difference. So Germany thrives on the gold standard with discipline, self-reliant finance, less beholden to the Rothschild-style cross-border lending networks. So they were doing very, very well financing themselves within their own bank network. Without the Rothschilds, without J.P. Morgan, without any of these other people. Okay. Some historical views argue the old pure European financial elites, the Bank of England circles and allies, they didn't like this. Independent success. Bad, Germany, bad. Germany wasn't playing the same debt-dependent game as everybody else was, right? Pissed them off. And Germany was becoming too strong, too autonomous. Basically everything in Germany was looking really, really well at the time. Manufacturing was up, jobs were up, people were happy for the most part. Okay. Economic rivalry fuels the alliances, the naval race, and the 1914 spark. War erupts, and Germany gets blockaded. And so the old order reassertion through reparations and debt, right? In that war is a racket. And that was something that Smedley Butler said during this time, that banks ensure they're on the winning ledger. So because Germany wasn't playing by the rules that the bank wanted them to play by, the banks set all of these hurdles in place that eventually led to war with Germany. Okay? Now let's go to World War II. And this World War scaled everything up. Fed caps yield, buys bonds en masse, money supply explodes, commercial bank absorbed huge treasury debt, and the holdings skyrocketed. And in Nazi Germany, the Reichsbank monetizes rearmament under state control, and the private banks, they went along with it. And keep in mind that World War I, because of the reparations that us and the other nations put on Germany during World War I, would ultimately lead to the reasons why, or the underlying reasons why we went to war in World War II. So post-war, we're looking at Bretton Woods, the IMF, the World Bank, extensions of Western, mostly U.S., banking power for reconstruction and influence, and banks profited safely. Government debt was basically risk-free, interest paid via taxes and or inflation. And keep in mind during this time that in between World War I and World War II, the banking power shifted from Europe to the Fed, which had had a few years to get settled in, right? And had changed to where they were collecting taxes and different things, and like they got us to go along with this centralized banking idea. Okay, so there was that banking shift from Europe to the United States. Okay, and that helps us become a world power and in winning World War II. So the other thing you should ask yourself, were we on the right side of the war? If we would have been knowledgeable of the banks and what was going on, could we have stopped World War II? Could we have stopped Hitler? Could we have stopped those things if our eyes would have been more open to what was going on within the world? Okay? Keep in mind some of that stuff is happening today as well. So let's go to post-World War II. We're also looking at the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, Iraq. Cold War onward, basically, endless deficits. The Fed enables cheap borrowing and the creation of money, because the Fed makes money. It can just spit it out at a whim. And banks hold swelling government debt, earn steady interest on every conflict. Okay, so even though these banks are holding debt for governments, now they're getting a yearly payment on those debts from interest, right? So that's kind of a no-brainer, okay? And so Vietnam, that spikes inflation. Iraq and Afghanistan, trillions were borrowed via treasuries. Once again, it's the same game. Wars for resources, influence, profit, and banks as quiet little perpetual beneficiaries in the background. Okay? And we can also look into the banks, the bankers, the people at the top. In more modern times, look at 9/11. They say that it was about one thing, but really do research. The Fed had misplaced, lost, whatever you want to call it. I think it was around like $2.8 billion at the time, or $2.8 trillion. I forget what it was, but it was a lot. Okay, the Fed lost it. They didn't know what happened to it, and conveniently, the section of the Pentagon that was holding those papers was the one that got hit, bombed, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, pretty convenient, right? The Twin Towers is where a lot of the financial sector was at well. So another convenience, right? Look at the insurance and stuff that was put on the Twin Towers. Look at Building 7 that was never hit by anything, no fire, nothing, just crashes, right? Got to look into those things. You got to ask questions, okay? You can't just accept the narrative that the government, a government, your government is giving you along with the media, because the media is owned by the government as well, okay? It's all controlled narrative. Got to look into this stuff. Not saying you have to have your little tinfoil hat on, but look into this stuff, okay? Ask those critical questions. So we got 9/11. We got the housing crash of 2008 because but the banks overextended. They overlended, okay? In that process, who got bailed out? Was it you? Did you get a check from the government? I know I didn't get a check from the government. No, it was the banks and the bankers. They created this downfall in the housing market, and the government, which the Fed, right, basically printed themselves a check and said, here you go. Here's a check for screwing up on the housing market. And they washed their hands of it, okay? COVID. Like we've talked about, it's pretty convenient that little mom and pop shops you couldn't shop at. But where could you shop? At the big box stores, okay? Who has interest in the big box stores? The big banks. Because most corporations that are within the market, within the stock market, they run on debt. And they get that debt from the Federal Reserve, from the big banks, okay? So they shut down the little guys, the little mom and pop shops, your little meat market on the store, right? And what do they leave open? They leave open Walmart and Sam's and Home Depot and all of these other places where you're going to run into hundreds and thousands of people. And that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly safe. You can go in there, but you can't go into your meat market where there's like 10 guys. Okay? And so that was to pull more money out of the little guy and put all of that money into the big guy where the banks made money. And how did they make money? Well, they made money off of the markets, off of the stock markets, because while everybody else was struggling, who was getting kickbacks? Who was getting, where would we spend those stipend checks that the government just graciously gave us? Well, we're going to spend them at the places that are open. Okay? And those stocks went up. Look at it. It did. Then look at who's tied to the Epstein files. Okay? Epstein had money in everything. He had his nose in everything. And when you get to digging, the bankers are tied to all of that. Also look into the media industry, the news industry, Hollywood, music, all of those run off the big bankers as well. Your influencers, those are paid by the big bankers. Okay, so all of this goes back to the banks, the big banks. Okay, they want to control everything. And like we talked about the other day, when, not if, but when America's economy collapses upon itself from within, because we're so divided, they will move on to the next system. And there is another system out there. It's called the BRICS, BRICS. Okay. And if that game gains enough traction and America loses being top dog, could the bankers shift to that type of an economy? Absolutely. Like, they're not going to stop making money. This is what these people do. They're very, very good at it. Okay. So in comes Iran, right? And so we're at war, but we're basically not at war, but we are at war. Okay. And so who profits off the war machine? Banks. Because all of these countries have to spend money defending themselves, which means they're going to print money, or they're going to borrow money, or they're going to buy from these companies that the banks have invested in, the big companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all of these other places that's going to make the bombs and the tanks and whatever else they're using, okay? And so it's a no-brainer for these people, right? So, in wrapping up our thoughts here, we have to challenge the private debt monetary system. We got to be like Lincoln's greenbacks. We got to be like Germany's self-reliant rise. Wars create debt. Debt creates control. And big banks collect these debts across centuries. They might not declare every war, but they enable the biggest and the longest ones. And I would say they do that in any and all of them. Without easy borrowing, many can shrink and can end quicker. Us just being knowledgeable on what's going on within the world. In the beginning, we asked, is this a grand conspiracy? Well, evidence shows systemic incentives or incentivizes these kind of systemic enterprises, the big banks, and there's an incentive for these puppet masters, so to speak. But when we look at the pattern is clear. Profit from chaos, debt as the ultimate leash. The ultimate leash. And this can be no clearer than we look at what they want to do in the future. They want everybody to be on like this, like a crypto, Bitcoin, digital currency. They want to have 15-minute cities. They want you to live off of not a credit score, but like a person score. Like each person would have a score, and it's based off how much you leave out of a carbon footprint. Your score goes down. If you're overextended on your money, your score goes down. If you travel too much, your score goes down. And so like this system that they're talking about is meant for us, the common people, not for them. They're still going to be able to fly around on their private jets and fly their expensive cars and live in their lavish houses, because that's not the world for us. Okay, so if you think that any of those things are good, like, you might want to go get your head checked. Okay, because those are all forms of control, and when they put all of those things in order or together, it creates a system where they can control you by making you live or having you willingly live in a 15-minute city. And then when you travel outside of your 15-minute dome, your money, your funds are cut off and you can't do anything. Okay? That's what they want. And so who's bringing that system in play? It's the big banks. Yes, some of it is the corporations, some of it is the government, but where do these people get their power? Where do they get their money? It comes from the big bankers. Okay? So, once again, we still have to ask, is this a grand conspiracy? Or are we starting to connect the dots that's been here the whole time? Are we starting to wake up? Okay? And that's the script, guys. It's connected. We have to watch for it. I mean, they put a lot of this stuff out right in front of us. We have to pay attention to what's going on. We can't be divided. We have to pay attention to what our government's doing and what our government's not doing. And while this is going on here, what is going on over here in the background that we need to be paying attention to as well? So, like always, stay skeptical, stay curious. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. Go on YouTube, on our page there, hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, post comments in the comment section, ask questions, ask me questions, name something you would like us to talk about. I'll try to get it out there, but we appreciate it. See you guys next time. God bless. Peace.